Amara Nkuru was known in Umwagu village as the woman whose smile softened even the hardest hearts. She walked with quiet grace, her laughter gentle like morning rain on red earth. Many said the ancestors had carved kindness directly into her spirit. She rose before dawn each day, sweeping the compound and humming songs her mother once sang. The smell of wood smoke clung to her wrapper as she cooked, her hands steady and patient. Life had not been lavish, but it had been honest and warm. Amara believed deeply in love, especially the love she shared with her husband, Chibuzo Okafor. She trusted that marriage was a sacred bond watched over by ancestors and spirits alike. To her, loyalty was not a question, it was a promise. When Chibuzo took her as his wife, she left her father's home with hope blooming in her chest. She believed she was entering a new family that would protect her. She did not know she was walking into the shadows of envy and hatred. That night, as the moon bathed Mwagu in silver light, Amara whispered a prayer of gratitude. The ancestors listened in silence, already aware of the fate threading its way toward her life. The Okafor compound stood large and imposing, its walls thick with history and unspoken rules. Chibuzo's mother, Mama Udo, ruled the household with a voice sharp as a blade. Her eyes measured Amara from the first moment, cold and unreadable. Chibuzo's sisters, Ifyananya and Ngozi, watched quietly, their smiles thin and forced. They spoke softly in Amara's presence, but their eyes followed her every move. Envy crept in where warmth should have lived. Amara tried endlessly to please them, waking earlier, working harder, bowing her head lower. She believed patience could heal suspicion and love could defeat bitterness. Each insult she swallowed felt like a small sacrifice for peace. But kindness only deepened their resentment, for Amara carried something they lacked. She carried Chibuzo's affection, his laughter, and his loyalty. In their hearts, she had stolen what they believed belonged to them. At night, while Amara slept, whispers traveled through the compound like restless spirits. Plans began forming in the darkness, fed by jealousy and tradition twisted into cruelty. Chibuzo loved Amara, but he was a man torn between devotion and fear. He heard his mother's complaints and his sister's warnings, yet he chose silence. In Mwagu, defying one's family was considered a curse waiting to happen. Amara noticed the change in him, the way his eyes avoided hers, the way his words grew fewer. She asked gently if she had done wrong, her voice trembling with worry. Chibuzo reassured her, but his comfort lacked conviction. Loneliness settled into Amara's heart like harmattan dust. She missed her mother's voice and the safety of her childhood home. Still, she endured, believing endurance was a woman's shield. Each night, she prayed to the ancestors for protection and clarity. She did not know her prayers were reaching spirits already angered by what was to come. The unseen world had begun to stir. Love, when left undefended, can become a weapon in the wrong hands. And in the Okafor household, silence was sharpening into something deadly. Mama Udo believed Amara was a bad omen sent to steal her son. She spoke of dreams where blood stained the earth and spirits cried in anger. Her daughters nodded eagerly, feeding the fire of her delusion. They began poisoning Chibuzo's mind, telling him Amara was barren and cursed. Each lie was carefully chosen, wrapped in false concern and tradition. Fear slowly replaced reason in his heart. Amara sensed danger in the way the household watched her. Even the air felt heavy, as though the compound itself held its breath. She started sleeping lightly, waking at every sound. One evening, she overheard her name spoken in hushed tones behind closed doors. Her hands shook as she realized the whispers were no longer harmless gossip. They were decisions being made without her life in mind. The ancestors watched in growing fury as injustice took shape. A wrong was being planned, and the balance of life and death was about to be shattered. Rain fell heavily the night fate sealed Amara's path. Thunder rolled across the sky like ancestral drums warning of bloodshed. Amara sat alone, staring into the darkness, her heart restless and afraid. She remembered her mother's words about listening to intuition. That night, intuition screamed, but there was nowhere to run. Tradition bound her feet, and love blinded her escape. Chibuzo avoided her gaze, his spirit already fractured by fear and manipulation. He could feel something terrible approaching, but lacked the courage to stop it. Regret was already planting roots in his soul. Amara whispered a final prayer, tears soaking her pillow. She asked the ancestors to protect her if the living would not. The wind howled as though answering her plea. Far beyond the visible world, spirits began to gather. Justice was preparing its return, and death was not the end. It was only the beginning. Morning came with an unnatural stillness, as though the village itself sensed danger. Amara woke with a tightness in her chest she could not explain. The compound felt colder, quieter, stripped of its usual sounds. Mama Udo summoned Amara before the family shrine, her voice stern and heavy with accusation. She claimed the ancestors were angry, that strange misfortunes had begun since Amara arrived. Every word was sharp, designed to wound and corner her. Amara fell to her knees in disbelief, tears streaming as she denied the claims. She swore by the earth and sky that she meant no harm. Her voice shook, but her truth was clear and pure. Ifeanyi and Ngozi stood beside their mother, faces hard and unforgiving. They accused Amara of witchcraft, of poisoning the family's destiny. Their words felt like stones thrown at a fragile heart. Chibuzo stood there, silent and trembling, his eyes avoiding Amara's desperate gaze. In that moment, her heart cracked, not from the accusations, but from his refusal to defend her. The elders gathered beneath the ancient Irako tree just as the sun climbed reluctantly into the sky. Its branches stretched wide like the arms of a weary god who had seen too much blood and too many lies. The air was heavy, pressing down on every breath Amara took, as though the world itself was holding judgment in its lungs. Amara knelt on the bare earth, her knees sinking into the dust that clung to her skin like a silent accusation. Her wrapper was torn from the struggle of the night before, and her eyes were swollen from crying without comfort. Still, she held her head up, clinging to the belief that truth, naked and honest, would protect her. Mama Udo stood tall before the elders, her back straight, her voice loud and unwavering. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had already decided the outcome. She painted Amara as a curse wrapped in human flesh, a woman whose presence had poisoned her lineage and angered the spirits. She came into my son's life like sweet rain, Mama Udo said, her voice trembling with false sorrow, but left destruction behind her footsteps. Since she arrived, our goats die, our dreams turn dark, and my son no longer walks in favor. Ifeanyi and Ngozi echoed their mother's words, nodding solemnly, adding lies to lies. They spoke of strange shadows, of Amara whispering at night, of misfortunes that had existed long before her arrival but were now conveniently placed at her feet. Amara lifted her trembling hands, palms open to the elders, to the sky, to the ancestors. When she spoke, her voice cracked like dry earth splitting under drought. She spoke slowly, carefully, as though each word might be her last breath. Fathers of the land, she cried, I am not what they say I am. I came into this house with love, respect, and fear of the ancestors. I have knelt before this earth more times than I can count. I have prayed with clean hands and a clean heart. Tears streamed down her face, carving paths through the dust on her cheeks. She spoke of her childhood, of the mother who taught her kindness, of the gods she had never mocked. She reminded them that the ancestors see truth even when humans choose blindness. Some of the elders shifted uneasily. One cleared his throat, another stared at the ground. For a moment, just a fragile moment, hope flickered in Amara's chest. She thought she saw doubt crack the walls of injustice. But Mama Udo was ready. She stepped forward and struck the ground with her staff. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the clearing, silencing sympathy. Do not be deceived by tears, she warned. Evil knows how to cry. Fear spread among the elders like wildfire. Fear of curses, fear of ancestral punishment, fear of being blamed if something went wrong. And fear, more than truth, rules men who hide behind tradition. Chibuzo stood at the edge of the gathering, his fists clenched, his heart pounding loud enough to deafen him. His eyes met Amara's for a brief second, a silent plea passed between them. She searched his face for rescue, for courage, for love. He looked away. That moment cut deeper than any blade. Amara felt something inside her collapse completely. The man who vowed to protect her had already surrendered her life. The eldest elder finally spoke, his voice low and heavy with false wisdom. If the spirits are angry, he said, then sacrifice must be made. One life may save many. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She shook her head violently, disbelief consuming her. I am not a sacrifice, she whispered. I am a human being. The verdict came like a slow death. No shouting, no drama, just cold words spoken by men who would not feel the weight of them. She must be removed. The earth seemed to tilt beneath Amara's knees. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by a ringing silence. She screamed then, not a scream of fear, but of betrayal so deep it tore through her soul. She collapsed forward, pressing her forehead into the dirt. Her tears soaked into the soil, binding her pain to the land forever. The ancestors felt it. The earth remembered her name. As the elders rose and dispersed, pretending justice had been done, a wind swept through the Irako tree. Its leaves trembled violently, though no storm had been announced. Spirits stirred, angry and awakened. This judgment would not go unanswered. Not in this world. Not in the next. Night fell slowly, like a wound refusing to close. The moon hung low over the Okafor compound, pale and watchful, as if even it was afraid of what was about to happen. Crickets sang nervously, their chorus broken by long silences that felt heavier than sound inside the small hut. Amara sat on the floor with her knees drawn to her chest. Her eyes were red and hollow, as though all her tears had already been spent beneath the Irako tree. The judgment replayed in her mind again and again, each word striking like a whip. When Chibuzo finally entered, he did not greet her. He stood by the doorway, unable to step closer, as if guilt had built an invisible wall between them. The man who once smiled at her like sunrise now looked like a stranger wearing her husband's face. Amara slowly raised her head. Her voice, when it came, was soft, too soft for the weight it carried. Tell me the truth, Chibuzo, she said. Do you believe them? Silence answered her. The kind of silence that screams louder than words. She stood up, her legs shaking as she walked toward him. Look at me, she pleaded. Look into my eyes and tell me you think I am evil. Chibuzo's lips trembled. Tears gathered, but he still could not meet her gaze. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken and weak. No, I don't believe it. The words should have saved her. Instead, they destroyed her. Then why? Amara cried, her voice cracking open like dry wood in fire. Why did you let them say those things? Why did you let them condemn me? Chibuzo sank onto a wooden stool, burying his face in his hands. He spoke of tradition, of fear, of curses that haunted men who challenged their mothers. He spoke of being torn apart by loyalty, of not wanting to lose his family. As he spoke, Amara felt something inside her die slowly, painfully. She realized he feared losing his family more than losing her. In his world, she was replaceable. She knelt before him, pride forgotten, dignity stripped bare. She held his feet, pressing her forehead to them, tears soaking the ground between them. Please, she whispered, help me leave. Take me back to my father's house. I will endure the shame. I will survive. Her voice trembled with hope so fragile it was almost cruel to witness. Chibuzo reached out, then stopped. His hand hovered in the air, trembling. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the walls of the hut like a warning. If I help you, he said slowly, they will curse me. They will disown me. Amara lifted her head and stared at him in disbelief. Her eyes searched his face for the man she married, the man who promised protection. What she saw instead was fear wearing a human body. So my life is the price? She asked quietly. He did not answer. That was the moment her love for him collapsed completely. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with a deep, aching sorrow that settled into her bones. She stood up slowly, wiping her tears with trembling hands. May the ancestors judge between us, she said. Her voice was calm now, too calm. Chibuzo finally looked at her, and terror flashed in his eyes. For the first time, he understood what he had done. But understanding came too late. Amara lay down that night, without sleep. She stared at the roof, listening to every sound, every breath, every movement outside. Her heart beat loudly in her ears, counting down to something she could feel but could not see. In the spirit world, the ancestors gathered closer. They watched the man who chose fear over love. They marked his name. Cowardice, they knew, would not escape judgment. The night swallowed the village whole, leaving only shadows to bear witness. The stars blinked faintly, as if hesitant to look upon the cruelty about to unfold. Amara's heart pounded in her chest like the drum of a funeral procession each beat louder than the last. Her hands were tied, her feet bare, and every step dragged her closer to a death she could feel in her bones. Mama Udo's grip was iron on her arm, cold and unyielding. "Do not speak," she hissed, her voice sharper than a razor. Ifeanyi and Ngozi flanked her, their faces masks of cruel satisfaction. Amara tried to pull free, but the strength of 3 women bent on her destruction was too much. As they forced her along the narrow forest path, the trees seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches forming shapes like claws and reaching hands. Every rustle of leaves was a whisper of warning. Owls hooted in the distance, their cries mournful and long, carrying messages Amara could not fully comprehend. Yet she knew they were warnings. They were cries for justice she had not yet received. Her bare feet sank into mud and fallen leaves, each step tearing at her skin. The rain from the previous evening had left the earth slick, cold, and unwelcoming. Her breaths came in sharp, shallow gasps, her chest heaving as panic clawed at her throat. "Please, someone," she whispered, but the forest swallowed her words, leaving only the heavy sound of her own despair. Amara thought of her mother, of the gentle hands that once braided her hair. She thought of her father's voice, blessing her marriage, promising that love and duty would protect her. Each memory became a dagger twisting in her chest. She realized, with unbearable clarity, that no one would come for her. Chibuzo, the man she loved, had abandoned her to fear. Mama Udo stopped abruptly at a clearing bathed in moonlight, or what little penetrated the forest canopy. The earth here had been recently turned, darker and damp, a shallow grave waiting to swallow Amara's life. She froze, her stomach lurching violently. She could see every stone, every clump of dirt that would soon cover her. "No, please," she cried, dropping to her knees. Her voice tore through the forest, raw and trembling. "I am innocent. I have done nothing." Ifeanyi's hand landed across her face, hard enough to spin her head. "Silence," she spat. "The ancestors demand obedience, not whining." Ngozi pushed her down to the cold earth, holding her there as Mama Udo stepped closer. The chanting began, not prayers of protection, but words twisted with malice, invoking powers Amara did not understand. Every syllable felt like a knife carving into her heart, marking her for death. Amara's tears fell freely, mixing with the soil, her body trembling uncontrollably. She thought of Chibuzo one last time, imagining him standing up for her, imagining him saving her from this nightmare. But reality hit like a stone. He was gone. His courage had been buried with her hopes. Her final plea went unheard. She screamed, a sound so raw it seemed to shake the trees themselves. The forest answered not with mercy, but with silence, the kind of silence that makes life feel as fragile as a dying ember. The first blow came, sharp, sudden, and overwhelming. Pain exploded through her body as darkness rushed to claim her. She felt herself falling into the soil, into oblivion, yet her spirit clung to the memory of love, to the injustice, to the rage that had been building in her chest for weeks. As the dirt covered her, heavy and suffocating, something impossible happened. Her mind and soul did not succumb. Somewhere deep within, the fire of life refused to die. She felt the presence of the ancestors circling, whispering promises of vengeance, weaving her sorrow and betrayal into a power that could not be buried. Even as her body rested beneath the forest floor, Amara's spirit began to stir. The injustice had not silenced her. The betrayal had not broken her completely. She would rise, and when she did, the living would know fear. The wind swept through the clearing, scattering leaves and carrying her silent screams into the night. The forest, witness to the murder of innocence, shivered. Death had taken her body, but it had not yet touched her soul. The forest fell silent after the last blow. Even the night creatures seemed to hold their breath, sensing the injustice buried beneath the earth. Amara's body lay motionless, a lifeless form shrouded in soil and leaves. Yet beneath that soil, her soul stirred, a fire refusing to be quenched. Pain, grief, and betrayal fused into a single, searing energy inside her spirit. Her hands, now intangible and luminous, rose through the dirt, brushing against the roots and stones that had buried her. She could feel the earth's cold grip, the weight of cruelty pressing down, and it only fueled her determination. The ancestors appeared around her, unseen by mortal eyes but radiating immense power. Their whispers threaded into her consciousness, ancient and commanding. You were taken too soon. You were wronged. Justice cannot wait for the living. Rise, child, and claim what is yours. Amara's eyes opened beneath the soil. At first, they glowed faintly, dim embers flickering against the darkness. Then, as her rage and sorrow grew, those embers flared into fiery orbs, burning with the intensity of all the wrongs done to her. She felt the presence of Mama Udo, Ifeanyi, Ngozi, and even Chibuzo, each name a sharp thorn in her mind. She memorized every face, every betrayal. Her spirit rose, piercing the soil with a force that shook the earth itself. Leaves rustled violently above, as though nature itself recognized the birth of something divine and terrible. Amara hovered above her grave, translucent at first, but slowly becoming more solid, more dangerous. The forest trembled around her. Even the wind seemed to retreat, afraid of the power gathering in her form. She remembered her life, the laughter, the love, the faith she carried in her heart, and the betrayal that destroyed it all. Her grief transformed into something sharp and purposeful. She did not cry anymore. She did not plead. She did not forgive. There was only justice in her heart now. Mama Udo's voice rang in her memory. The lies, the accusations, the triumph in her cruelty. Ifeanyi and Ngozi laughing at her pain. And Chibuzo, trembling and silent, who chose fear over love. Amara's lips moved in a silent chant, but her words carried a force the living could not comprehend. The ancestors' whispers became a chorus. Let them feel the weight of what they have done. Let their blood answer for their betrayal. Let the balance be restored. And then, as the moonlight pierced the forest canopy, Amara's spirit solidified fully. Her eyes burned like molten gold. Her hair floated around her face as if underwater. Shadows bent unnaturally around her, twisting toward her as if drawn to her power. The air carried a chill so deep it burned the lungs of anyone nearby. For miles around, the forest felt her presence. A dog barked frantically in the village, windows rattled, and doors creaked without wind. Somewhere, Mama Udo shivered, her body tense with an unnamed fear. The first threads of terror were weaving their way into the hearts of the living, and Amara had not even left the grave. Her spirit looked down upon her grave, the dirt now a cage she had broken free from. Her lips curled into the faintest, coldest smile. Death had taken her body, but it could not take her will. She was no longer just Amara Nkiru, the gentle woman of Umwaga village. She was something greater, something terrible, a force of vengeance that the living would soon fear. And in the silence of the forest, her first words whispered into the wind. I will rise. I will not forget. And none of you shall escape the debt you owe me. The ancestors murmured in approval. The injustice had been acknowledged. The fire of vengeance had been lit. And far away, in the Okafor compound, the first signs of fear began to stir, even though none of them knew the shape it would take. Amara's ghost had returned. And this time, the living would pay. The Okafor compound had never been quiet at night, but on the first evening after Amara's burial, an unnatural silence fell. Doors creaked open by themselves. Shadows moved where none should exist. The flickering firelight cast shapes that looked eerily like a woman walking through walls. Mama Udo was the first to notice. She awoke to the sound of whispering, soft and sorrowful, carrying a warning she could not understand. Her heart froze. The blankets that usually offered comfort now felt suffocating. She clutched the edge of her bed, shivering despite the warm night air. Ifeanyi and Ngozi also felt it, the temperature dropping, their breath misting in the air, and a chill crawling over their skin as if icy fingers were tracing their spines. They whispered nervously, exchanging fearful glances, but Mama Udo hushed them, refusing to admit she too had felt it. Amara's presence was subtle at first, a fleeting shadow, a faint outline of her long hair drifting across walls. But her eyes, glowing faintly gold, appeared in mirrors and windows, burning into the minds of those who dared look. Fear seeped into the compound like water into dry earth, soft at first, then unstoppable. And somewhere deep inside, Chibuzo felt a tug at his soul, a whisper of guilt that made him sweat in the darkness. He could not see her, but he knew. His silence, his cowardice, had awakened something he could no longer control. The next night, Amara's ghost grew bolder. She whispered through the walls and corners, words of accusation and warning that chilled the hearts of her killers. Mama Udo woke screaming, clutching her chest as if her own mother were strangling her in judgment. Ifeananya found her reflection in the water jar twisted, her own face distorted by terror, and for a moment she saw Amara's face instead. A slow, mournful wail filled the room, the sound echoing through the walls like sorrow made audible. Ngozi awoke to the smell of wet earth and blood in her hut. She shivered violently, though no rain had fallen. Shadows moved independently of the firelight, forming the outline of Amara's body as she hovered above the floor. Fear rooted Ngozi to the spot. Chibuzo tried to intervene, but every step toward his family felt like walking through water. He whispered Amara's name in desperation, praying she would spare them, but the whisper turned into a bitter, haunting laughter that only reminded him of his failure. By dawn, the Okafor family knew something wronged, something not human, was in their home, and it was patient. Days passed, and Amara's hauntings intensified. Objects moved by themselves. Doors slammed shut with force. Fires flickered in shapes that resembled her face. At night, the air smelled of jasmine and damp soil, a scent that once reminded Amara of home, but now served as a prelude to terror. Mama Udo began losing sleep. She would awaken to Amara's outline standing at the foot of her bed, silent, glowing eyes fixed on her. She tried to pray, but her tongue faltered. Words of comfort and protection failed her. The ancestors themselves seemed to side with Amara. Ifeananya and Ngozi's jealousy and cruelty now reflected in their nightly terror. Shadows chased them, whispers accused them, and the things they had ignored in life became monstrous in the dark. Their screams began to wake the village, but no one dared approach the Okafor compound at night. Chibuzo, guilt-stricken, could barely stand. Each night he saw her face in the firelight, a look of hurt and betrayal that pierced him deeper than any physical wound could. He began talking to himself, begging forgiveness from someone who could not be bargained with. The villagers murmured in fear, saying the spirits of the wronged girl had returned. They dared not approach the Okafor home after sunset. Even the forest seemed to retreat from the compound, afraid of the vengeance now gathering strength inside. One evening, Ifeananya was the first to face Amara fully. Alone in the kitchen, she felt the chill descend like a living thing. The flames from the fire twisted into shapes of Amara's face, her eyes glowing like molten gold. She screamed as unseen hands grabbed her, pushing her into the wall. Objects flew around her, utensils spinning in the air like knives, yet leaving no marks. Amara's voice, sad and angry, whispered from every corner, "You buried me, but I am not gone." Ifeananya collapsed, shaking uncontrollably. Her mind raced through guilt, fear, and regret, but no prayer could shield her. For the first time, she understood the weight of her actions, the cruelty she had carried out without remorse. Mama Udo and Ngozi ran in at the sound, but by then, the ghost had vanished, leaving only the echo of her laughter and a scent of earth and jasmine. Ifeanyanya's eyes were wide and hollow. She whispered, She's alive, she's coming for us." The first act of vengeance was subtle, terrifying, and deeply psychological. Amara's ghost had begun to unravel their minds before she even touched them physically. The village slept under a quiet sky, unaware of the growing storm at the Okafor compound. But within the house, silence was dangerous. Every creak, every shadow, every breath became a potential threat. Amara's spirit floated through the walls, unseen yet omnipresent, feeding on fear, anger, and betrayal. Chibuzo finally admitted to himself that he could not save anyone. His cowardice had unleashed something beyond human reckoning. He could only watch and pray, though even prayer felt powerless. Mama Udo, once proud and cruel, began seeing the outlines of Amara in mirrors, in the firelight, in the spaces between shadows. Each night her fear grew, festering into panic, then terror. Amara's vengeance was not yet complete. These nights of haunting were the prelude, the warning, the first chapter of reckoning. Soon, the Okafor family would face the full fury of the woman they had buried alive. The forest whispered her name. The wind carried her promise. And in the darkness, Amara's eyes glowed brighter, her wrath ready to be unleashed. "I have returned," she whispered into the night. And I will not forgive. The moon was hidden behind heavy clouds, and the Okafor compound lay under a suffocating darkness. Mama Udo huddled under her blanket, praying silently, but her words felt meaningless against the presence that hovered unseen in the corners of the room. A cold breeze swept through the house, extinguishing lamps and causing shadows to writhe like living things. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with the memory of Amara's pain. Mama Udo's heart raced. She could feel the accusation of the girl she had buried pressing down on her soul. From the far corner, a faint golden glow appeared, growing brighter with every heartbeat. Amara's face materialized in the air, eyes molten, staring directly at Mama Udo. Fear rooted her to the bed. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "No, no, it can't be." The ghost did not speak at first. She circled the room slowly, her movements graceful yet deliberate, like a predator stalking prey. Every step drew a shiver from the living. Mama Udo felt her bones ache as if the anger in Amara's spirit was pressing against her very body. When Amara finally spoke, her voice was soft, mournful, and terrible all at once. "Do you feel what I felt? The fear, the pain, the betrayal? You buried me, but I rise. And now you will see." That night, Ifeanyi awoke screaming. Something invisible grabbed her hair, yanking her head backward. She flailed, hitting the walls, but no one was there. The air smelled of wet earth, of blood, and of jasmine, the scent Amara carried from her death. Ngozi rushed to help, but her feet froze. Amara's form appeared in the doorway, glowing faintly, her hair flowing as if underwater. Her presence filled the room with cold, and the sisters realized that even together, they were powerless. The house shook. Utensils flew from the shelves, furniture tipped over, and the fire leapt unnaturally. Amara's spirit did not touch them violently yet. She did not need to. Fear alone was enough. She whispered each memory of betrayal into their ears, making the sisters relive the night they buried her. Ifeanyi dropped to the floor, sobbing. I didn't think. I didn't know," she stammered. But Amara's ghost only shook her head, eyes full of sorrow and wrath. "This is not about what you thought," Amara said. "This is about what you did." The night was heavy and still, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest and made every breath feel like a betrayal. Chibuzo lay awake on his mat, sweat clinging to his skin despite the cool night air. He had tried to sleep, to block out the thoughts of Amara, of what his in-laws had done, and what he had failed to prevent, but the memories refused to leave. A faint whisper rose from the shadows. At first, he thought it was the wind, rustling the trees outside. Then the whisper grew louder, clearer. It carried her voice, soft and trembling, yet laced with power and accusation. Why did you let them?" Chibuzo's eyes shot open. His heart hammered violently as he scrambled to sit up. The shadows in the corner of his hut thickened, growing darker until they coalesced into a figure, Amara. Her eyes glowed like molten gold, burning through the darkness, piercing his very soul. I was afraid," he stammered, voice breaking as he fell to his knees. "I didn't know what to do. I thought if I stayed silent, maybe I could keep them safe. I didn't want to lose you too." Amara's ghost drifted closer, her face both familiar and terrifying. Her hair floated as if underwater, and her eyes reflected not only grief but the immense betrayal she felt. The anger in her gaze was palpable, vibrating through the walls, the air, the very floor beneath him. "Afraid?" she whispered, her voice soft but deadly. "You were afraid, and because of your fear, I died. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You let them bury me alive." Her words cut through him like knives, each syllable a fresh wound opening in his chest. Tears blurred Chibuzo's vision. He covered his face with trembling hands, trying to hide from her, from the reality of what he had done. I didn't want this. I love you, Amara. I love you. Please, forgive me." Amara's figure hovered above him, almost ethereal, yet heavier than any weight he had ever felt. She placed a hand, translucent but burning, over his head. The pressure of her presence forced him to look at her, to face the truth he had hidden even from himself. He had failed the woman he loved. "You cannot fix this," she said quietly, almost sorrowfully, but the sorrow carried the weight of eternity. "Your love comes too late. Your guilt is your punishment, Chibuzo." You will live with this, as I live now, with the pain you allowed. The wind outside the hut rose suddenly, rattling the walls, throwing open the door. Shadows twisted and danced around the room. Objects lifted from the floor, spinning slowly in the air. Amara's fury was building, yet it was controlled, precise, and terrifying. Chibuzo cried aloud, his voice echoing through the empty hut. He fell forward on his knees, pleading, begging, not for himself, but for a forgiveness he knew he did not deserve. Amara, I am sorry. I am so sorry. Her eyes softened for a fleeting moment, the faintest trace of the woman he had loved showing through the wrath. But it vanished instantly, replaced by the cold fire of justice. Sorry is not enough, Chibuzo. I trusted you, and you failed. You will watch. You will remember. And you will fear, just as they fear me now. The ghost of Amara lifted slightly, her form stretching taller, more imposing. The air grew colder, denser, heavier. Chibuzo felt as if invisible hands were pressing on his chest, constricting his lungs. The weight of his guilt and her vengeance merged, making it impossible to breathe or think. You think your tears can undo what has been done? She whispered, voice rising to a wail that echoed through the night. I was buried alive, and still, I rise. Do you understand, Chibuzo? I am not yours to save. I am not yours to forgive. I am the storm you cannot escape. The hut trembled. Objects clattered violently, and the door slammed shut with a force that made the walls shudder. Chibuzo fell forward, clutching his head, sobbing uncontrollably. The golden glow of her eyes filled the room, reflecting in every corner, in every shadow. Then, slowly, she receded, drifting toward the doorway. Her final words lingered like smoke in the room. I am here. I am watching, and I will not stop until justice is done. Chibuzo remained on the floor long after her presence faded, shaking, tears running freely, broken by the weight of his own failure. That night, he realized something that would haunt him forever. He could not outrun his guilt. He could not hide, and he could never undo the wrongs that had led to Amara's death. The wind whispered outside, carrying the faint scent of earth and jasmine, the scent of Amara, alive in death, and hungry for the reckoning she had promised. The night was heavy with a strange, unnatural stillness. The village of Umwagu lay under a blanket of darkness, pierced only by the faint flicker of distant lanterns. But near the Okafor compound, the air trembled with something alive and terrifying. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if it, too, feared what was stirring in the shadows. Outside the house, the forest had become a living witness to Amara's rage. Trees twisted unnaturally, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. Leaves rustled without wind, carrying whispers of grief, accusation, and power. The scent of wet earth and jasmine, her essence, seeped into the village, clinging to every thatched roof and pathway. The animals of the forest, usually indifferent to humans, fled in terror. Birds screamed into the night, their cries raw and fearful. Monkeys scattered, their warning calls echoing through the dense trees. Even the smallest creatures, the insects and rodents, hid in the shadows. The forest itself had recognized the return of the wronged girl and trembled beneath her presence. Amara hovered above the soil near the edge of the compound, her glowing golden eyes scanning the surroundings. Her hair floated like fire in the wind, her translucent form solidifying with power. She stretched her arms, and the very air seemed to hum with her energy. The whispers of her ancestors joined her, threading through the night in a chorus of justice. From the village, distant villagers began to notice. Windows rattled as they slept. Dogs barked frantically in the dark. The villagers whispered among themselves of curses, of spirits returning from the grave. None dared approach the Okafor compound after sunset. Rumors spread like wildfire. The girl they buried, she walks again. And she will not forgive. Inside the compound, the Okafor family could feel it too. Mama Udo's knees shook, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her bed. Ifyananya and Ngozi's faces were pale, their eyes wide with terror. Chibuzo sat in the corner, silent, broken, watching shadows twist along the walls. From the forest, Amara's presence seeped into the compound, pressing against every door, every wall, every window. Her whisper floated through the air. I see you. I hear you. And you cannot hide. The wind intensified, bending the trees, scattering leaves, and carrying the sound of her voice across the village. The villagers slept fitfully, dreaming of a woman wronged, of a ghost with golden eyes and the fury of ancestors. No one could ignore it. The Okafor family realized, with a terror that settled deep into their bones, that Amara's vengeance was not confined to the house. It was everywhere. In that moment, Chibuzo understood the full weight of his failure. Every creak of a branch, every whisper in the night, every shifting shadow reminded him that Amara's spirit had grown beyond the grave. She was no longer just a victim, she was a force. A reckoning had arrived, and the forest whispered her promise, as if the trees themselves had learned her vow. I was buried, but I rise. I am here, and the living will pay. The Okafor compound shivered under her power. The night was no longer safe, the air no longer calm. Death had returned with purpose, and it had chosen its target. The storm that night was unnatural, heavy clouds swirling in violent currents above the Okafor compound. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the house in sudden, stark flashes. The sound of distant thunder shook the ground, but it was nothing compared to the fear that gripped the family inside. Mama Udo lay on her mat, wide-eyed and trembling. Ifeanyi and Ngozi clung to each other, silent except for the shallow, uneven gasps that escaped their lips. Chibuzo sat against the wall, unable to move, paralyzed by the weight of his guilt and the knowledge of what was coming. Then, in a flash of lightning, she appeared. Amara hovered in the center of the compound, fully formed, her eyes molten gold, her hair floating like fire in the storm. Her presence carried the chill of death, yet the scent of wet earth and jasmine lingered, a reminder of the life that had been stolen from her. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. Objects lifted from the floor, spinning violently in the air. The flames in the hearth twisted unnaturally, casting monstrous shadows across the walls that mimicked Amara's form. The family realized they could no longer deny her presence. I told you I would return, she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of fury. I told you justice would be mine. You buried me. You thought me powerless, but I rise. Mama Udo cried out, scrambling backward. Amara, please forgive us. We didn't know. It wasn't meant to. It was meant to, Amara interrupted, her voice slicing through the room like a blade. Every word, every strike, every tear I shed underground, every moment of fear you caused me, was meant to be. And now, it will be returned to you. Ifeanyi's scream was cut short as an invisible force slammed her against the wall. She slid to the ground, sobbing, clutching her chest as though the weight of Amara's wrath was pressing her into the earth. Ngozi tried to help her, but the ghost's glowing eyes turned toward her, and she froze, unable to move. Chibuzo fell to his knees, covering his face. Amara, please. I failed you. I am so sorry. Amara's gaze shifted to him, and for a moment, the fury in her eyes softened, replaced by the sorrow of betrayal. But the moment passed. Her wrath was unstoppable. She raised her hand, and the air around the family trembled violently. A chair lifted and hovered, suspended midair, while kitchen tools danced around them like instruments of accusation. You were afraid, Chibuzo, she whispered, her voice both gentle and terrifying. And your fear cost me everything. Now, you will watch. You will live in this terror as I did. You will see what it means to betray love, to betray life itself. Lightning cracked again, and the compound shook. The walls groaned under the pressure of supernatural force. The family huddled together, paralyzed with fear. Outside, the forest seemed to lean toward the house, as if acknowledging the presence of the wronged spirit within. Amara descended slowly, floating just above the ground. Her hair drifted around her like a halo of fire. The family realized, with icy clarity, that she did not need to touch them to inflict terror. Her presence alone was punishment enough. You thought you could hide from me, she said. You thought death could silence me. But I am not gone. I am here. I am justice. And I am patient until it is done. The storm raged louder. Wind howled through the compound. Doors slammed shut on their own, and the shadows twisted into grotesque shapes that reflected the fear of the living. The family's cries filled the night, but Amara's presence was absolute. She was everywhere, glowing in the firelight, reflected in mirrors, woven into the shadows themselves. As she drifted toward the center of the room, The temperature dropped, frost forming along the edges of the walls and windows. The family shivered violently. Amara's voice echoed, carrying the weight of every wrong committed against her. You buried me alive. You thought you could escape. But I rise, and you will not survive the night without fear. And with that, she vanished in a swirl of golden light and whispers, leaving behind only the echo of her promise and the scent of earth and jasmine. The storm outside calmed slightly, but the fear inside the compound remained, solid and tangible, as if the air itself remembered her presence. The Okafor family realized, finally, that their lives would never be the same. They had awakened something unstoppable, and Amara's revenge had only just begun. Mama Udo could no longer sleep. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Amara's golden gaze staring at her from the corners of the room. Even in her dreams, the girl who had once been a daughter-in-law laughed bitterly, whispering accusations into her ears. She tried to pray, fumbling with beads and verses she had once recited with confidence, but her voice faltered. Every attempt at protection seemed to dissolve into thin air, swallowed by the oppressive presence of Amara's spirit. One night, as Mama Udo fetched water from the kitchen, she felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder. She spun around. Nothing, but the shadows themselves seemed to twist, forming Amara's silhouette. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. Why did I let it happen? Mama Udo whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. The ghostly figure appeared beside her, floating effortlessly, hair flowing like liquid fire. You knew, Amara said, voice soft yet terrifying. You knew, and you did nothing. Now, you will feel what I felt. The walls of the compound trembled. Objects lifted and hovered, spinning around her like instruments of accusation. Mama Udo fell to the ground, crying, shaking, broken by fear she had never imagined possible. Ifyinanya's punishment began subtly, then escalated. Shadows whispered her darkest secrets back to her. She awoke nightly to feel fingers brushing her skin, to see shapes moving just beyond the lamplight. Every sound made her flinch. Every whisper made her heart pound like a drum. One evening, as she lit a fire, she saw Amara's reflection in the flames. Her face glowed golden, hair floating wildly, eyes full of sorrow and rage. Ifyinanya screamed, dropping the burning log, which rolled across the floor harmlessly. The fire itself seemed to obey Amara. Do you remember? The ghost whispered, circling her. Do you remember the fear, the betrayal, the laughter when I begged for mercy? Ifyinanya fell to her knees, shivering violently. I didn't know. I was scared too. Amara's gaze pierced her soul. Fear is no excuse. And you will live with this, just as I lived through what you did to me. The shadows in the room twisted violently, pressing against Ifyinanya as if to squeeze the truth from her bones. By morning, Ifyinanya could barely move. Her hair was tangled, her clothes damp with sweat, and her eyes were hollow. She had felt a piece of Amara's grief and wrath, and it was more than any living person could endure. Ngozi had always been proud, cruel, and dismissive, but Amara's vengeance found her next. She awoke one night to the sound of whispering, her own name repeated in tones that made her blood run cold. The whispers became voices, dozens of them, each one recounting the night they buried Amara, each one echoing with accusation. Objects moved of their own accord. Chairs tipped over, food jars rolled across the floor, and the scent of wet earth and jasmine filled the room. Ngozi ran to the door, but it slammed shut before she could escape. Amara appeared before her, golden eyes blazing, hair floating in waves that seemed alive. You chose cruelty over compassion, she said softly, almost sadly. And now, you will feel the weight of every wrong you have done. Ngozi screamed as the shadows twisted into shapes of the girl she had wronged. She fell to the ground, clutching her head, overwhelmed by visions of Amara's death, her terror, and the sorrow that had followed. By the time dawn broke, Ngozi was trembling violently, silent, broken. She had lived through a fraction of Amara's pain, and it was unbearable. The Okafor sisters realized that Amara's vengeance was not just supernatural. It was emotional, psychological, and unrelenting. Chibuzo's punishment was the most personal. He could not run, he could not hide. Every shadow became a reminder of his cowardice. Every whisper reminded him that he had failed the one he loved. One night, He saw Amara in the center of the compound, floating above the floor, her presence casting an unnatural golden glow. "You could have saved me," she said, voice full of sorrow. "But you chose fear. Now you will carry this guilt until the end of your days." The wind howled, doors slammed, and objects flew through the air, but none of it touched him physically. The punishment was worse. The emotional weight of knowing he had failed, magnified 100-fold by Amara's wrath. "Please, forgive me," he begged, falling to his knees, tears streaming down his face. But Amara's eyes only reflected the depth of betrayal. "Forgiveness is not mine to give," she whispered. "It is your burden to bear." Chibuzo collapsed fully, sobbing uncontrollably, as the storm outside mirrored the chaos inside his heart. He realized that some mistakes could never be undone, and some wrongs demanded a reckoning beyond human mercy. By the fifth night of her return, Amara's presence dominated the entire compound. Every room carried her scent, her whispers, her glowing eyes appearing in mirrors and shadows, in every reflective surface. The family could not escape her gaze. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer, trees twisting unnaturally toward the house. Villagers whispered in fear as the wind carried faint, mournful cries from the Okafor home. The living and the dead shared the same terror, bound together by the injustice that had been committed. Within the house, the Okafor family huddled together, broken and silent. Each had faced a fraction of Amara's wrath, and each had been scarred, physically unharmed, but emotionally shattered. Their pride, cruelty, and cowardice had been stripped away, leaving only fear and regret. Amara's final words that night echoed through every corner of the compound. "I was buried alive, but I rise. You cannot hide, you cannot escape, and I will see to it that every wrong you committed is paid in full." The night fell heavy again, but this time, the darkness carried a promise. Amara's revenge had begun, and the Okafor family would never know peace again. The night air was thick with a tension that made every breath painful. Shadows in the Okafor compound seemed alive, crawling along the walls like fingers reaching for the family. Mama Udo clutched her chest, feeling invisible hands grip her as if to squeeze the truth from her soul. Amara's presence had grown stronger. She no longer appeared only in flashes or reflections. She moved with intention, solid and terrifying. Golden eyes glowed from the darkest corners, her hair streaming like fire, and her whispers carried the weight of every wrong committed against her. Ifeanyi tried to light a lamp, but the flame flickered violently and died, leaving the room in darkness. In that void, Amara's face emerged, glowing faintly, eyes locked onto hers. "You thought fear would protect you?" she whispered. "Fear is nothing to me. You will feel my justice in every shadow, in every heartbeat." Ngozi shivered as a chair lifted and hovered inches above her head. The wind roared inside the compound, tossing objects, rattling windows, and making the walls groan under pressure. The sisters clutched each other, trembling, as if the very air itself carried Amara's fury. Chibuzo, kneeling in the corner, could only watch. His guilt had become tangible, a physical weight pressing him to the floor. The storm outside mirrored the chaos within, and he realized Amara's vengeance had no limits. She had become the embodiment of every fear, every regret, every wrong ever done to her. The next evening, the family dared to gather near the fire, hoping that light might offer some protection. But the flames danced unnaturally, twisting into Amara's face. Her golden eyes glowed in the flames, staring at each of them individually, revealing secrets and sins they had tried to hide. "You thought hiding would save you," Amara whispered. Her voice carried over the crackling fire like a chant, rhythmic and haunting. "You thought death could silence me. But I am here, and I will see that every tear I shed is repaid tenfold." Mama Udo gasped as her memories were laid bare before her. Moments she had dismissed, cruel words she had spoken, actions that had contributed to Amara's death. Ifeanyi and Ngozi both screamed as they were forced to relive the fear in Amara's eyes the night they had buried her. Chibuzo's sobs filled the room, uncontrolled, as the ghost hovered above him. "You could have been my shield," she whispered, "but instead you became my chains. And now, you will feel the weight of your cowardice." The room grew colder with every passing second. Frost formed along the edges of the walls, condensing on the windows. Amara's golden eyes were everywhere now, reflected in every surface, a reminder that there was no corner of the compound where she did not reach. Amara did not act alone. The whispers of her ancestors joined her, rising from the soil beneath the compound, carried by the wind, threading through the very walls. They spoke in a language only the guilty could understand, recounting the injustices that had allowed her death to occur. The sisters clutched their ears, trying to block the whispers, but they could not escape them. Every syllable drove the guilt deeper, every echo cut sharper. The ancestors' voices carried the power of centuries, and Amara's fury magnified it tenfold. Outside, the trees bent unnaturally, branches brushing the roof as if the forest itself conspired with her. Dogs howled, birds screamed, and even the river near the village churned violently, reacting to the storm of justice Amara had become. "Do you hear them?" Amara asked softly, hovering above Ifyinanya. "They know what you did. They know what you allowed. And they demand that justice be served." The sisters cried uncontrollably, realizing the enormity of their crimes. Amara's vengeance was no longer personal. It was cosmic, intertwined with the judgment of the ancestors themselves. Chibuzo reached his breaking point. Every night, Amara's gaze followed him, whispering accusations, replaying memories of his cowardice, making him relive the moment he had failed to protect her. He could not eat, could not sleep, could barely breathe without the pressure of her presence bearing down on him. One night, she appeared directly in front of him, hovering inches above the ground. Her eyes burned with sorrow and fury, and her voice carried a weight that made him collapse onto his knees. "You were my love," she said softly, "and yet you let me die? Do you feel the truth of that failure now?" Tears streamed down his face as he gasped for air. I do. I am sorry. I am so sorry. You will live in this guilt," Amara whispered. "You will remember every moment, every choice you made. You will carry the pain I endured. You will never find peace until justice is complete." Chibuzo fell forward, sobbing violently, feeling the crushing weight of every life he could not save, every choice he could not undo. The storm outside echoed his anguish, and the forest seemed to shiver in recognition of the punishment being meted out. By the 10th night, the Okafor compound was unrecognizable. Objects were thrown about, walls were scratched with claw-like marks, and an unnatural chill lingered in every room. The family could not sleep, could not eat, could not speak without fear that Amara's golden eyes would find them in every shadow. Amara hovered in the center of the compound, fully solid and terrifying. The wind swirled around her, carrying the scent of earth and jasmine, and the whispers of her ancestors hummed through every crevice of the house. "You thought death would silence me," she said, voice booming. "You thought I could be buried and forgotten. But I rise. I rise for myself. I rise for the truth. And you will pay for every second you stole from my life." Mama Udo, Ifyinanya, Ngozi, and Chibuzo huddled together, broken, trembling, tears streaming freely. Every ounce of pride, cruelty, and cowardice had been stripped away. They were nothing but fear and regret, perfectly exposed to the judgment of the girl they had killed. And outside, the forest whispered with anticipation, as if the world itself knew that Amara's vengeance had only just begun. Mama Udo awoke to a cold, unnatural silence. The fire in the hearth had died, leaving the room in shadow. She shivered, her body stiff with fear, as a whisper curled around her ear. "Do you remember what you did?" Before she could respond, Amara appeared in the center of the room. Her golden eyes glowed brighter than ever, and her hair floated around her like living flames. "You thought I would forgive. You thought your prayers could erase what you allowed," Amara said softly. Mama Udo fell to her knees. "Please, I was wrong. I didn't know it would go so far." Amara raised her hand, and the shadows responded. The walls seemed to bend inward, pressing Mama Udo into a corner. Every step she tried to take twisted beneath her, forcing her to confront every harsh word, every cruel act, every moment she had ignored Amara's cries. Tears streamed down Mama Udo's face as she cried out, unable to escape the weight of her own guilt. Amara's voice softened for a fleeting moment. "You will live with this fear. You will never forget it. Only then can justice breathe." Ifyinanya's punishment was relentless. She woke to find her reflection in every shiny surface, mirrors, pots, even the surface of water. Each reflection twisted into Amara's face, screaming in terror and pain. "You mocked me," Amara whispered, circling Ifyananya like a predator. "You thought cruelty was a game. But I am the truth of that cruelty, and now you will feel it." The room seemed to stretch unnaturally. Objects levitated, slamming into walls, and the wind howled through the house. Ifyananya clutched her chest, screaming as the shadow of Amara's form grew and twisted around her, showing visions of her guilt magnified. Amara begging for mercy, pleading for life, the grave, and the earth swallowing her. She fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, as the weight of Amara's wrath pressed into her very soul. I am sorry," she cried, voice raw. Amara's golden eyes pierced her heart. "Sorry cannot undo what was done. You will live in this memory until the end of your days, and every shadow will remind you of your failure." Ngozi had always believed cruelty was power. That belief evaporated the moment Amara appeared in her room. The ghost floated above her, hair flowing like fire, eyes glowing with sorrow and rage. "You believed my life was yours to take," Amara said. "You thought you could decide who lived and who died. But I rise, and the scales are mine to balance." Ngozi screamed as the shadows stretched across the room, forming shapes of the dirt and soil that had covered Amara alive. The weight of the earth pressed down on her chest, yet she was still conscious, still aware, still terrified. Visions of Amara's last moments, screaming, gasping for air, clawing at the soil, flashed before her eyes. Every second burned in Ngozi's mind, amplified by Amara's supernatural presence. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, Ngozi was a trembling mess, broken by the memory and horror. Amara had carved fear and sorrow into her soul, a reminder that cruelty always has consequences. Chibuzo had believed that his guilt alone would save him, but Amara's justice was impartial and relentless. She appeared in front of him, eyes glowing, hair floating, presence suffocating. "You failed me," she whispered, voice full of sorrow and fire. "You had the chance to protect me, and you did nothing. You will live with that truth every moment of your life." Chibuzo collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I can't forgive myself, please." Amara extended her hand, and the shadows of the forest and soil pressed against him. He was surrounded by visions of her death, of the terror she felt, of the betrayal of every family member who had turned their back. "You will carry my pain," she said. "It will be your companion. You will remember, you will suffer, you will never forget. Only then is justice complete." The room fell silent except for his sobs, the weight of his guilt finally made physical, spiritual, and eternal by Amara's presence. By the next night, the Okafor compound was unrecognizable. Doors hung off their hinges, shadows twisted unnaturally across the walls, and a chill lingered that no fire could dispel. The family huddled together, broken, every sound a reminder of Amara's presence. Amara hovered in the center of the room, golden eyes blazing, hair flowing like flames. The wind roared through the compound, carrying the voices of the ancestors she had called upon. "You thought burying me could erase me," she said. "But I rise. I am the storm, the truth, the reckoning. And you will live under my gaze until the end of your days." The family shivered, tears streaming down their faces, every moment a reminder of the cruelty they had committed. They were powerless, broken, and entirely at the mercy of the girl they had wronged. Outside, the forest whispered and swayed as if in harmony with Amara's wrath. The villagers far away could feel it too, a force moving through the night, unstoppable, unrelenting, a warning to all who would harm the innocent. Amara's golden eyes swept across the compound, lingering on each family member, a silent promise. She would not stop until every injustice had been paid. The storm of vengeance had truly begun. The night air was heavy and suffocating. The Okafor compound felt alive with malice, as if the walls themselves had become instruments of Amara's wrath. Mama Udo trembled in the corner, unable to move, unable to breathe normally. Suddenly, a shadow stretched from the center of the room, forming into Amara's glowing silhouette. Her golden eyes burned brighter than ever. "You will pay for what you did to me," she said, voice carrying like a storm. Mama Udo screamed as the floor beneath her seemed to ripple like water. She tried to run, but the shadows of the earth rose to grip her ankles. She was pulled downward, slowly, painfully, as the spirits of the forest and ancestors closed in. "No, please forgive me," she cried. The air vibrated with Amara's fury, the very walls groaning under the power that filled the room. And then, in a flash of golden light, Mama Udo vanished, leaving behind only a faint trace of Jasmine and the whisper of Amara. Justice is served. The Okafor family could only stare in horror, realizing that Amara's vengeance was no longer just psychological, it was lethal. Ifyananya tried to flee, but Amara's presence was everywhere, a living shadow that mirrored her every move. Golden eyes glowed from the darkness, following her, penetrating her soul. "You mocked me," Amara whispered. "You laughed at my fear. You buried me alive. Now, feel what I felt." Objects rose violently around her, spinning through the air. The walls shook, rattling everything inside. She tripped over the air itself, the invisible weight of Amara's wrath pinning her to the floor. Vision after vision of Amara's death played before her eyes, the soil crushing her, the panic in her golden gaze, the terror of being abandoned by those who should have protected her. She fell to her knees, sobbing, broken beyond repair. A chilling wind lifted her off the floor, suspended in air by unseen hands. A final whisper echoed in her ear. "You will live in fear, every day, every night, until justice is complete." Ifyananya collapsed, shaken and terrified, forever marked by Amara's vengeance. Ngozi, too, could no longer hide from Amara's wrath. She awoke to the sight of the ghost hovering above her bed, eyes glowing like molten gold. Her hair flowed wildly, radiating power and fury. "You thought cruelty was your strength," Amara said. "But cruelty brings only death." The floor beneath Ngozi cracked, shadows twisting into grotesque forms, pressing in from every direction. The walls seemed to close, carrying whispers of every lie she had told, every act of malice she had committed. Ngozi screamed, clawing at the walls, trying to escape the weight of Amara's judgment. Her breaths came in short gasps, tears streaming, body shaking violently. Amara leaned close, whispering directly into her ear, "You will carry my pain. You will never know peace. Every heartbeat will remind you of what you did." Shadows dissipated, leaving Ngozi trembling, her mind forever scarred. Chibuzo had been the most tormented, but even he was not spared the final confrontation. Amara appeared before him, hovering, golden eyes blazing, hair floating like liquid fire. "You failed me," she said, voice both sorrowful and cruel. "You could have saved me, and instead you let me die. Now, your soul will bear the weight of every moment I suffered." Chibuzo fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Memories of that fateful night, the burial, the screams, the pleas for help, flashed vividly before him. He gasped, choked, felt his heart pound as if it were breaking. Amara extended a hand, and shadows wrapped around him, pressing into his chest, forcing him to feel every second of her terror, every pang of betrayal. His cries echoed through the compound as the storm outside roared in resonance. "You will carry this until your last breath," Amara whispered. "Only then is justice complete." Chibuzo collapsed, broken in body, spirit, and soul, utterly consumed by the weight of his failure. By dawn, the Okafor compound was quiet, eerily still. The walls were scratched, the floors scattered with debris, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and jasmine, the lingering presence of Amara's power. The surviving family members huddled together, trembling, emotionally shattered. Some were broken physically by the force of the hauntings. Others were broken psychologically by the inescapable guilt and terror they now carried. Amara hovered in the center of the compound one last time, golden eyes sweeping over them, her hair floating like fire. "I was buried alive. You thought you could silence me. But I rise. And justice has been done," she said softly. Then, as quickly as she appeared, she vanished, leaving behind a faint warmth, the scent of jasmine, and the echo of her promise. "You will never forget. You will never escape. You will live in the shadow of what you did to me." The compound remained in silence. The storm outside faded, but the horror and sorrow inside lingered like a permanent scar. Amara's vengeance had been delivered, irreversible and absolute. leaving the family forever haunted by the consequences of their cruelty. The village had never been so quiet. Even the usual calls of the forest birds were absent. A heavy dread hung in the air. Rumors spread quickly. The Okafor compound was cursed. Villagers peered cautiously from the distance. Shadows flickered unnaturally in the windows, and a cold wind swept across the village lanes. Those brave enough to approach whispered, "It's Amara. She's back, and she's angry." Some tried to flee, clutching their children, while others whispered prayers, hoping to ward off the evil. But the village knew this was no ordinary haunting. The wind carried faint, sorrowful cries and the scent of jasmine. Elder men shivered, saying, "We buried her, but she lives. The spirits do not forgive." Inside the compound, the Okafor family huddled, realizing their actions were no longer private sins. They had drawn the attention of the supernatural and the entire village. Amara returned that night, not as a fiery figure, but as a looming shadow that seemed to blend with the walls and earth. Her golden eyes glimmered from the darkness, a permanent reminder of what had been done to her. The family could see her in every corner, in every reflection. "You cannot hide from me," she whispered. "Every stone, every grain of earth, every shadow remembers your crime." Ngozi cried out as her reflection morphed into Amara's face, silent but accusing. Ifeanyi buried her face in her hands, trembling violently. Chibuzo whispered through his tears, "How? How can we ever make this right?" Amara's voice was soft but unstoppable. "You cannot. Only understanding the weight of your sin will keep you alive, for now." The villagers finally approached the compound during the early hours, daring to investigate. They saw shadows moving like living beings inside the house, lights flickering, doors slamming with no wind to blame. A brave man shouted, "Who is there? Show yourself." Amara appeared at the window, her golden eyes glowing. The villagers froze. A cold wind whipped their hair, carrying whispers. "Justice cannot be ignored. I was killed. I rise. Beware." Some fled screaming, others fell to the ground in terror. The Okafor family watched from inside, knowing that their sins had now unleashed fear beyond their walls. Amara's vengeance had spilled out to touch the world beyond the compound, warning that injustice would not go unpunished. That night, Amara focused on Ifeanyi. She hovered above her, eyes glowing like molten gold. "You mocked my life," she whispered. "You laughed when I pleaded. You will now live with the echo of my pain forever." Ifeanyi screamed as visions of Amara's burial replayed around her. The soil, the terror, the suffocating darkness. Objects levitated and smashed around her, though she was untouched physically. The punishment was entirely psychological. "You will remember every heartbeat," Amara said. "Every shadow will whisper my name. Every tear you shed will remind you of the life you took." Ifeanyi collapsed, shaking violently, sobbing uncontrollably. Amara faded into the shadows, leaving only a lingering presence that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Ngozi wandered the halls, alone, haunted by Amara's presence. She could hear whispers from every corner, memories of cruelty, moments of betrayal, visions of Amara's fear and suffering. "You thought yourself safe," Amara whispered, her voice surrounding Ngozi like fog. "You believed I would be gone. But I am here always." Shadows pressed against her, mimicking her every move. She fell to the floor, shaking, realizing she could never escape Amara's gaze. By the morning, Ngozi was silent, hollow, broken entirely by the weight of her sin. Amara's vengeance had reduced her spirit to fear and regret. Chibuzo tried to pray, to reason, to make amends, but nothing could undo his failure. Amara's ghost appeared before him in the room where she had first died. Golden eyes glowed in the darkness. "You let me die," she whispered. "Every moment you failed me, every choice you made to turn away, lives within you. You will bear it until the end." Chibuzo fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Shadows of Amara's last moments pressed around him. He relived the suffocating soil, the panic in her eyes, and the betrayal of everyone who abandoned her. By the next dawn, he was broken, forever haunted by the memory of the girl he had loved and failed. By the next night, the house itself seemed to groan under the weight of Amara's presence. Doors and windows rattled violently. Walls cracked, as though the foundation itself mourned the injustice done. Amara hovered in the center, eyes blazing. You thought you could bury me and forget? You thought I would vanish. Objects levitated, smashed, and scattered as if the house itself was alive with her wrath. The Okafor family huddled in the corner, too terrified to move, too weak to resist. The villagers watched from a distance, realizing that Amara's vengeance was unstoppable, a force that would mark the house forever. Amara floated above the ruins of the compound, golden eyes surveying the surviving family members. "Justice is done," she whispered, voice both sorrowful and commanding. "You will live in fear, you will carry guilt, and you will never forget what you have done. Let my story serve as a warning. Cruelty cannot bury the truth, and injustice never goes unpunished." Her hair drifted like fire in the night wind. The storm outside calmed slightly, but the chill she left behind was permanent. Amara vanished slowly, melting into the shadows, leaving the scent of jasmine in the air and a lingering warmth that was both comforting and terrifying. The Okafor family remained huddled, trembling, their lives forever changed. The house was scarred, their spirits broken, and their hearts full of regret. The villagers whispered among themselves, "A ghost could bring justice, but cruelty leaves marks no human can erase." Amara's presence would be felt for generations. Years later, the compound stood abandoned. The Okafor family had scattered, forever haunted by the memory of the girl they had killed. Stories of Amara's return circulated in the village, how she rose from the grave to deliver justice. Even the children spoke in hushed tones of the golden-eyed spirit who had been wronged and had returned. The scent of jasmine and the echo of whispers haunted the wind. Amara's vengeance had been complete. She would not return to harm the innocent, but her story served as a reminder. Cruelty can never silence the wronged. And in the shadows of the forest, where the soil was dark and sacred, one could always feel her presence, golden eyes glowing, ensuring that injustice would never go unanswered. Please subscribe, share, like, and comment for more videos.